Okay, welcome everybody to our Mussar study group. I really am Batya Gage. I'm actually here for a change on time. I didn't have any out of town trips or long trips to Dallas to the VA. So we're going to start tonight with battle plans, a little bit different than we have the last couple of weeks. And then we'll about halfway through, we'll switch to Leah and she will cover our book Windows to the Soul. I had it here in my hand, and cover our parsha for the week. So if you, well, let me start with a funny story. When my daughter, way many years ago, just started driving, one of her tasks, duties, as a privilege of driving was to pick her brother up from school. So I get home from work one day and she's there and I said, "Where's your brother?" She goes, "Oops." I didn't think it was an oops. I thought it was kind of a big deal. So now where is your brother? Well, our chapter this week is kind of like that. In our world today, sin is no longer a big bad thing that we avoid. Sin is like a little oops, oh, no big deal. So that's what we're going to look at tonight. Many of the Torah sages and Torah scholars have said that that's our problem. We no longer despise sin. We're used to it. We tolerate it. We live with sin every day, and we've gotten way too used to it. And he likened it to like you get a little spot on your skin and you ignore it, and then it grows and it grows, and then all of a sudden you finally go to the doctor and it's a serious cancer or something, and you didn't deal with it all along because you were just kind of used to it. It was just a little spot on your skin, and then it can end up killing you, just like sin can. We all know. We can just turn on the TV, the media, the social media, and look at how familiar sin has become. Media doesn't even call it sin. In fact, we're taught to tolerate it. In fact, I was listening to Dennis Prager today and talking about the colleges and how they are requiring students to address, I don't even know what to call them, but people that no longer identify with their birth gender. And they're putting out these training classes on what pronouns to use. So though us that see it as sin, we're the bad ones now. So the world has become good is bad and bad is good. It's a topsy-turvy world. And the act of distinguishing between good and evil is just outdated. It's a thing of the past. It's nothing that we deal with anymore. In fact, we are taught to tolerate, to be tolerant, to tolerate everybody's just different. Just, everybody to their own thing. And they give an example of this in the book as the internet. When the internet first came out, rabbis warned against it and warned against the evils, but nobody really listened to them. And then we started using the internet and we got familiar with it. And we can now see how far that has come and how much evil can come from just the internet. It says here, in many cases, familiarity does not breed contempt. Familiarity breeds acceptance. So if you're around something long enough, you just come to accept it. Our next section in this chapter talks about 7 names for the Yetzer Hara. All of y'all have been with us for this whole book, so you know that we've been studying about ways to combat battle plans against the Yetzer Hara. The Maharal has 7 names that he has pulled out from the scriptures, basically, on several names that different people have given to the, excuse me, my nose is itching tonight, of the Yetzer Hara. The first one is given by Hashem, and that is Ra, or just plain old evil. Hashem calls the Yetzer Hara evil. We know that Hashem is the source of all goodness, all creativity, all light, all giving. So evil is everything that is opposite of Hashem. Evil is anything or everything that conceals Hashem's goodness. So keep that in mind as we go on, and we're going to come back to that. According to the Maharal, goodness is absolute and real because it's a manifestation of Hashem. When we look at what he created, we see Hashem's goodness. And so if good is that which reveals the creator, evil is that which conceals the creator. And he talks about 4 kingdoms: Babylonia, Persia, Greece, and Rome, under whose rule the Jewish people were under different times. And what these 4 kingdoms did in different ways was to conceal the presence of Hashem in many different ways. So it says here that before creation, there was only Hashem. So there was only goodness. But once Hashem began to create other things, the door was now open for evil. So the illusion, not the actuality, but the illusion of the absence of Hashem, because we know Hashem is never really absent, but that feeling, anytime you have that feeling that Hashem is absent, then that's where evil comes in. It says here again, divine absence is an illusion. In the ultimate sense, then, evil doesn't really exist because Hashem's absence does not happen. But it's easy for us to be blind to Hashem's presence. And Hashem's own definition of evil is the absence of good, or the apparent, not real, but apparent absence of Hashem. So our battle plan number 9, and I tried this one out a couple of times this week, and it really worked on me. If you're in a situation where you're about to be tempted to say something or get angry or whatever, this battle plan here may help you. Since the Yetzer Hara operates by making Hashem appear to be absent, the Yetzer Hara can be defeated by simply experiencing Hashem's presence, by putting Hashem into the picture. So how do we do that? We can do that by reminding ourselves that Hashem is here, whatever the situation is. If I'm about to blow up and get angry, stop and say, Hashem is here now. Do I really want to do this? If we're about to go somewhere, do something we don't need to be doing, stop and say, Hashem is here. Do I still want to do this? Visualization, visualizing his presence. And again, it says, if on the edge of sin, simply say to yourself, Hashem is here now. And I tried this one, and it kind of calmed my anger a couple of times, or my impatience or my frustration when I was about probably to say something I shouldn't say. That calmed me down a bit. So this is a real good battle plan. Our next section covers something that was very interesting to me because I had never really read this. But throughout history, from Moshe onward, the various leaders have I can't think of the word, but have made the Yetzer Hara less bad. We start with Moshe, who to him, the Yetzer Hara was just something was so disgusting. It was to be avoided at all costs. He considered the Yetzer Hara as an uncircumcised person. Now we know that in the Israelite camp, an uncircumcised person was basically outside the camp. They weren't even a part of the people. They were an other. They were so totally other that they didn't really have any effect on the Israelites. The Yetzer Hara, it says, as we will see, though, in later generations, the Yetzer Hara assumed a more fluid identity, sometimes appearing as part of us, sometimes appearing as something foreign to us, or whatever. But to Moshe, the uncircumcised person was so other that it really had no effect on him. And it says here that Moshe was on such a high level that the Yetzer Hara no longer had really any connection to him. they called him transcendent. He had transcended above that. Now, we wish we could all be at that level. And if we want to get back to that level, which I don't know that we can ever attain the level of Moshe, but we have to see evil like he saw evil. Now we go to David, King David, and he called the Yetzer Hara just tameh, impure. And if you think about it, a person that became impure, they were set outside the camp for a while, but they came back and they became a part of the camp again. They were repulsed for a while, kept at a distance, but then they came back. So this made the evil one step closer to acceptable. After all, an impure person is just a person like you and me. And so that made them a lot more acceptable. He said it was just an aspect of humanity. It's a part we reject. We want to reject it, but it's still just a part of being human. Moshe, by contrast, was so transcendent that he saw the Yetzer Hara as totally separate from him, not part of his humanity. And it gives us an example that none of us would be tempted to perform a human sacrifice. But for Moshe, every sin was like that. Every sin was up to the level of a human sacrifice. And we need to make every sin at that level. But David was closer to our level, and so he could define the Yetzer Hara as something kind of like him, not like him, but kind of like him. And so it made it something he could relate to. And so it wasn't quite as loathsome and disgusting as the way Moshe saw it. Now, Shlomo went a little farther, and he just called it the enemy. The Yetzer Hara, the evil, is the enemy. Also separate from the person, but also a person that could actually be related to, that you could actually do battle with. It talks about him and his wives and how he, we know he married a lot of wives. He wasn't afraid to touch evil. He thought he could elevate evil. And his intent was whatever holiness lay hidden in these societies from which his wives came, that he could elevate it. But Hashem told him not to do it at all. And it says for Shlomo, the Yetzer Hara was just an adversary, maybe even a respectable adversary, maybe even attractive, like his wives. Interesting thing in here, and I have seen some of these posters. If you look back at World War II propaganda, in order to make the enemy instead of a human being, they put monster faces on the faces of the enemy. Whatever country they wanted to get their people to get behind the war effort, they would make propaganda posters and put these evil, they did it to the Jews. They would put these horrible, ugly faces of the Jews and put them on posters so that people didn't see these people as human. They saw them as monsters. And so kind of what we've done is we have put a human face on sin instead of the monster face that it really should have. The next one on the list is Yeshayahu, who simply called it a stumbling block. Nothing intrinsically bad about a stumbling block. You don't hate a stumbling block. You pick it up, move it out of your way. And it's more of an inconvenience, just something to kind of go around, stay away from. Ezekiel saw the Yetzer Hara as just a stone, so a little bit less. And so he said, when your heart feels like stone, that's the Yetzer Hara. And it says, during these periods of time, our prayers might be mechanical and unfeeling. Our love for each other is forced or non-existent. We don't feel that the stone is our enemy. We consider it normal, just a phase we're going through. We make peace with it even. Instead, it's just like something we need to work on. And this is a much lower level of the Yetzer Hara. The last one is the prophet Yoel, and he called it a viper. And he said it's concealed. It's something that's in my heart that's concealed, but it's a part of me. I know it's there, or maybe I don't even know it's there. But it's just something that is hidden in my heart that's not good. So even a lower level of evil, and so you can see how they each one kind of made it more acceptable or less disgusting or less awful. And they compared it in the book to kind of like bacteria. You don't even realize it's there until, because you can't see them, until it's about to kill you. And only then do you know that the bacteria is present in your bodies and can you take steps to fight it. So then how do we climb back up this ladder? One says here, when we say to love Hashem with all of our body, it suggests that we visualize ourselves being burned at the stake, or maybe laid on the altar, or whatever picture that you come up with in your mind that works for you, where it just shows your physical body is just being completely given over to Hashem. There's a story in the book, and I love this story. It talks about one of the most recent war in Gaza in Israel. The author was on the way home, stopped at a friend's house, and she wanted to know what's going on with the war. And she said, well, 3 of our boys have been killed. And she said something about the enemy. And she said, no, we did it to ourselves. You may have heard of something called friendly fire. It's when a troop or men or soldiers fire accidentally on their own people and injure or kill them. And she says, this is what we do to each other all the time. We fire on each other. We're critical. We condemn each other. We throw words at each other. It's like friendly fire, but it's can kill each other. And she says the speaker of Lashon Hara causes death and swords and killings. And we're doing friendly fire to each other. We're killing each other, not the enemy, but with each other. She says in the book to picture a mortar shell. We maybe here in the United States have a harder time picturing a mortar shell, or maybe a bomb of some kind. When you start to speak Lashon Hara, before you do, stop and picture lobbing a bomb at this person and all of the destruction that it will cause if you let go of those words. And perhaps that will be a deterrent to close those words down. So battle plan number 10, make sin repulsive again. Somehow, when you're about to commit the sin, picture a terrorist attack about to happen. And if you do this act, then you're like a terrorist that's about to harm somebody. Picture taking a sharp knife and stabbing someone, and maiming them and killing them perhaps. If you're about to eat a food that you know you shouldn't eat, picture maggots all crawling in it. Anything you can do to make sin repulsive. If you're about to steal something, even something minor from your employer or someone, picture putting your hand in the Tzedakah box and taking the money out. So whatever you need to do to visualize, to make sin repulsive in your mind. And it says the more specifically you can visualize the scene, the more real it would become for you. And the more likely it will pop into your head in the future again when that temptation comes up again. So make sin repulsive by assigning each sin that comes up with one of these, the most horrible picture you can come up with. Our next section talks about satisfaction. We've talked a little bit about this before. The Yetzer Hara disguises itself as something that will give us satisfaction. We see this most often in ads. You have to have this whatever, this car, this house, this new phone, this whatever, and it will give you satisfaction. You will be happy. Satisfaction is not only physical. We know people that have literally every material thing they could want, but they're not happy. But neither is it only spiritual, because if a person's basic needs haven't been met, they're also not satisfied. So true satisfaction is a way of taking the physical and giving it spiritual depth and meaning. And so that's what we need to work on. Taking the physical and infusing it with spiritual meaning. And then this will begin. Remember the empty place. We keep talking about the empty place within us. And we talk about how we try to fill that empty place with something that will satisfy us. It's like, you know, you can imagine being out. You've been working outside all day in the Texas heat. You haven't had a drink, and you just, you know, that feeling of that you need something to satisfy you. But it says here that the Yetzer Hara's sales slogan, just like in an ad, is this, whatever this is that you're being tempted with, this is the very thing that will give you satisfaction, when we really know it won't. So battle plan number 11. Again, we've talked about this many times. When you feel that sense of lack, be on your guard, number one. Know that, hey, this is the Yetzer Hara is right here. And he's going to try and fill that empty space with something that's not going to do us good. It's going to bring us down. They say it's if you have put on the front of your house a room for rent sign, vacancy here. And so the Yetzer Hara knows, oh man, I've got this person because they've got an empty room for me, and I'm going to go in there and fill it. So it's just like we've put up a big sign. So in order to battle that, we don't allow empty spaces in our life. We should fill our life with meaningful activities. They don't all have to be, we don't have to be studying Torah 24 hours a day, but it even says here, we can fill it with doing good deeds. Sure, absolutely. Art, artistic expression, painting, music, intellectual pursuits, learning a language. It says here, a balanced life must have time for productive leisure, you know, going to the gym. Hadassah and I love to go to the gym, listening to music, taking a walk in nature with your spouse. Now, we have to be careful that we know the difference between productive leisure that kind of re-energizes us so we can get back to the service of Hashem, versus things that we're just filling up empty time. Some people are able to play a few video games to calm themselves down before they go to sleep at night. Other people are filling too much empty space with video games. And so it's taking away from Torah study or good deeds or other things they should be doing. And so we have to recognize the difference. Is this something that's taking me away from something that I need to be doing? Or is this something that is re-energizing me so that I can get back to the service of Hashem? So what we need to do in this battle plan is take down that vacancy sign, find meaningful activities to fill our life, and tell the Yetzer Hara, sorry, buddy, there's no room for you here. Wow, that was the end of my section. All right.
You did just like me, and you went right through it.
That seemed to go really fast.
Yes, it can. If you could shift the pin to where it's both me and you, and then me, then that's what I was doing before.
There we go. And I'm going to mute me and turn it over to Leah.
Thank you. Amazing how much these two books are going together so well. It's interesting to me too. The second book that we're doing is Windows to the Soul, and it is interesting to me because some of the same things that she just talked about are in this week's parasha. And I always get excited when we get to this parasha because it's my parasha. So I'm always gleaning all kinds of interesting stuff from this. And this week was actually really hard for me to see a common theme. Our author starts off with the fallen angels. And I'm like, what? Fallen angels? So he starts pointing out some interesting things. So the two angels that took Lot from Sodom apparently fell. And he says the reason why they fell is because they said, if you don't leave, I can't do anything. But they should have said, Hashem's going to destroy Sodom. So what they had done is they put on themselves what Hashem was doing. They took credit for what Hashem was doing. And I thought, their sin was basically taking credit for what God does. And I thought, well, how often do we do that? You know, they're like Miss Batya said, so many times people don't even recognize what Hashem does in their life. They don't even see him. They're blind to God. So the next thing was he explains how, you know, angels generally do not have free will. And he goes into explaining the reason for that is because they're not like in a city corrupted by evil. They're basically secluded with Hashem. The only time the angels have fallen were when before the flood, when all men were so corrupt except for Noah, and then with Sodom when those two angels fell. Now the interesting thing was in this section was that it was seeing Jacob reach the point in his walk with Hashem where he became, or he assumed, the role of the third patriarch. In seeing Jacob, the angels saw the reverse of their own error. Jacob had reached the point in his walk with Hashem that the tension between the earthly draws of physical man and the spiritual aspirations of the soul had been resolved in Jacob with the submission and servitude of the physical to the spiritual. Every bit of his potential was harnessed in the service of God, and nothing was squandered. Jacob's example of elevating the material existence rather than being corrupted by it allowed them to correct their error. And so it was when these two angels saw Jacob all these hundred of years later, from it was like 100 and I think he quoted 100 and some odd years later, 123 years later, that is when they were able to go up that ladder in Jacob's vision and return to heaven, and they saw Jacob's face on the throne of Hashem, which I thought that was really wild. The next section, so in that first section, I saw that as the importance of obedience, you know, but there seems to be this bigger theme, because if you think about it, Jacob was able to bring heaven to earth by being that person who was not allowing his Yetzirah to corrupt him. He did everything for Hashem, right? So in the next section, it talks about the place where this all took place. It was in the town or city of Luz, L-U-Z, which in Hebrew is spelled with the Lamed, Vav, and Zayin. I'm not really good at this yet. I'm learning. But the cool thing about this is this section is called the neck of the world, and I added be that bridge connecting heaven to earth. Luz is an interesting word. Our sages identify it as the name of the bone at the top of the neck on which the skull rests. It does not deteriorate in the grave with the rest of the body. And the Luz bone is nourished by the food that we eat on the post-Shabbos meal of Malva Malka. Luz serves as the bridge between the spiritual and the physical, the higher and the lower, the holy and the profane. It connects the head the domain of the intellect and the spiritual functions, with the body, the domain of the physical functions. The post-Shabbos meal also serves as the link between the pure spiritual world of Shabbos and the mundane week that follows it. In the Torah portion, Jacob is in the place called Luz, which he renamed Bet El, or House of God. It later becomes known as the Temple Mount. The temple was the bridge between heaven and earth. And if you guys remember, in the Gospels and the letters, what is the Messiah saying? He says that we have become the dwelling place, the temple, right? Our bodies have become the temple. So if that's true, then that even emphasizes this even more. How Jacob was that kind of a bridge, we need to be that kind of a bridge. The letters that spell the word luz in Hebrew are lamed, which means to teach, zayin, which means to dominate others, / or physical sustenance or nutrition. So this is referring to a physical appetite, an animalistic aspect of man. The letter vav means hook, and it's used as a conjunction like words and or in Hebrew. So what this is saying is luz is the place or thing where the spiritual, lamed, is connected, vav, to the physical, zain. So we need to be the same kind of bridge that Jacob was in the first section, so that others who are watching what we are doing see our example and can also do teshuvah. The third section is a washed pot does not boil. It's a very short section, like half a page. And the main point here was that, Jacob worked 7 years for Rachel, and it seemed like it went by really fast for him. Why is that? And the author points out that Jacob did not have an earthly passion for her. His passion for her was spiritual. And it made me think of, this wasn't a marriage of minds. This was a marriage of souls. And so to me, that kind of showed that, it reminded me of what Rebbetzin Younger said in her book, Life is a Test. When she talks about how you speak to children, you need to speak to their soul. And to me, this right here signified that Jacob saw Rachel's soul, and her soul saw Jacob's soul. And that's where that love was. If you think about it like that, then you start seeing that we're all souls. We're not short, tall, dark, light, blue-eyed, brown-eyed. We're all souls. And if you speak to soul, that makes a big difference. The next section is called But Rachel Was Barren. And wow, this one was the longest. Well, not longest. The first one was longest. But this one was the next longest. And it was really, to me, convicting and intense. Highlights. Okay, so this is addressing the part of where Rachel wanted children and didn't have it, but Rachel was the one that Jacob loved. And the Torah also says Jacob loved Leah. It's just that he loved Rachel more. Well, the author talks about, well, why is it then after it says that Jacob loved Leah, he just loved Rachel more, but then it goes to say that Leah was hated. And he says, is it possible that our patriarch Jacob hated his wife? Of course not. The word hate used here bespeaks of Leah's subjective experience. Women have a profound emotional need for complete commitment from their spouses. Leah saw that Jacob did not love her as much as he loved her sister Rachel, with whom she shared a marriage, and therefore she felt hated. We find that Eve had a similar attitude. Once Eve knew that she would die, she could not tolerate the thought of Adam outliving her and taking another wife. So Leah was the first of Jacob's wives to give birth, And the Torah connects her pregnancy to her being hated. Why, however, does the Torah mention Rachel's barrenness in this context? What is the connection between her infertility and Leah's sense of inferiority in respect to their husband? So then I'm going to skip down a little further. It says Leah's remark to Rachel is exceedingly odd. Where is there any previous indication that Rachel had taken Jacob from Leah? Furthermore, according to the Midrash, Jacob would have discovered that Laban had substituted Leah for Rachel on his wedding night because he and Rachel had agreed to prearrange signs to prevent just such a deception. Rachel, not wanting her sister to be embarrassed, had revealed the signs to her and allowed the marriage to go through. But by an act of unimaginable kindness, Rachel had put herself into a position to lose Jacob. As it was, she allowed her sister to share the husband who should have been exclusively hers. How then could Leah ignore her sister's selflessness and accuse her of having taken her husband when the exact opposite had occurred? So this is the crux of it. This all comes out when Rachel asks for the flowers that Reuben found and brought to his mother. Rachel's request for an agent that, they see it as an aphrodisiac or something to help with conceiving, agent that would add to her relationship with Jacob, unleashed in Leah a flood of suppressed feelings. Leah complained bitterly that in effect she had always been second fiddle in the home. When she complained that you have taken my husband, she was actually saying you have failed to let me be a full co-wife. When Rachel heard Leah's previously unexpressed complaint against her, she realized that this might very well be the cause of her childlessness. She strove to rectify it. She offered to allow Jacob to sleep that night in Leah's tent, thereby signifying that she could not stand in the way of Leah achieving an equal status in the home. This was the deeper significance of the exchange. As long as Leah felt that her status in Jacob's household was inferior, Rachel was withheld from having children. Only when Rachel discovered Leah's grievance and readdressed it was she finally ready to give birth to Joseph. Okay, so this is where it's really intense, because you're like, well, how would she have known if she hadn't been told? Well, now she's told, and what did she do? She fixed it, right? As for Leah, it took a measure of selflessness on her part to give Rachel the flowers and thereby enhance Rachel's relationship with Jacob, because, she already felt like she was on rocky ground. She took the chance to enhance Rachel's relationship. So she's showing that same kind of selflessness that Rachel had showed to let Leah marry Jacob to begin with. For her virtue, she was rewarded with 2 more children. And just in case you guys are not aware, which I'm sure most of you are, Leah had 6 of the 12 children. She also had the king and the priest, Judah and Levi. So God blessed her for her faithfulness. But why was Rachel required to achieve such an extremely high level of personal excellence before she could even bear Joseph? Think about that for a minute. She already showed this kind of selflessness back in the beginning when Leah ended up marrying Jacob, right? All these years later, she's being brought to a higher level of selflessness before she could even have Joseph. And the author goes on to say, perhaps it was to give her the ability to prepare Joseph, her firstborn, for the leadership role that he was destined to play in the development of the Jewish nation. Leaders, because of their superior position, can easily evoke undercurrents of jealousy and resentment. Providence directed that Joseph's mother forego her own superior position for the sake of family harmony and a true sorority with her sister. Her son would follow her example. So think about it. Because she was able to humble herself and submit to Hashem in what he was leading her and guiding her to do, she was worthy enough to have Joseph and teach him to do the same thing. When Joseph was born, Rachel says in chapter 30, verse 23, God has gathered in my shame. Ultimately, that was Joseph's role, to gather in the brothers physically and spiritually into a loving fraternity prior to their descent into Egypt. So that was like, wow, okay. Goosebumps. This is a big one. Okay, so the next section is the right time to leave. And I thought this was interesting because this showed to me a side of obedience that was just really interesting. This is talking about the whole part where Jacob decides, okay, it's time to go. We need to go back to my father's house. And he goes and talks to Rachel and Leah and tells them what's going on with their dad and how he's, starting to suspect that Jacob's stealing from him when in fact Laban has been stealing from Jacob this whole time. So the key parts that I highlighted were, he says, why does God tell Jacob to return home just when his relationship with Laban sours? Why should Laban's new manifest attribute play a role in the timing and the divine plan for Jacob's return? And why is it dependent on Jacob noticing it? Furthermore, why did Jacob preface his recounting of the divine order to leave with a description of this deteriorating relationship? By all rights, Jacob should have felt gratitude towards Laban, and that gratitude should have bound him to Laban. He might have thought that the gratitude was not sufficiently important consideration when weighted against the building of the Jewish nation. Therefore, God told Jacob to return only after he saw through Laban's benevolent facade. So once Jacob could see through what Laban was doing, God said, now it's time to return. And he didn't just make this decision by himself. He was a very smart man, a very wise man, and talked to his wives, both of them. Well, all of them. Now that he understood what that God had delayed the prophecy until he could see clearly that leaving was not an act of ingratitude, he wanted to make sure that his wives enjoyed the same clarity. He did not want them to perceive any ingratitude in their abandonment of Laban. And so he reviewed the entire chain of events with them. And this is the key thing, many years later, Moshe would follow this same model. When he leaves the house of his father-in-law Jethro, to return to Egypt. After God informs him of his mission at the burning bush, Moshe first returns and asks Jethro's permission. Only after Moshe fulfilled the requirements of proper gratitude to Jethro, who really deserved his gratitude, does God actually command him to leave. So I guess the common thing I'm seeing through all of this is that when we are obeying God, we become a bridge that makes brings heaven to earth, the tikkun olam. When we obey God, we are making it possible for people to see Hashem and his will in our lives and are able to do teshuvah themselves. So I'm not really sure what, the word just jumped out of my head. character trait this is. But obedience is a big thing in there. And I think, awe of God, Yirah, has a good part in that. But I think that it's not an in-your-face kind of Yirah. It's more of a subtle, I want to obey God because I love him so much. And I'm going to live my life the way God tells me to. That is what I saw in this chapter. So does anybody have at this point any kind of questions or comments that they want to make on the portion that Miss Batya shared or the portion from Windows of the Soul? If you do, you can unmute your mic and speak up.
I just have to say that this whole portion just shows us why one wife at a time is the best.
Yes, yes, it does. But
but there's purpose in this.
I can understand too why maybe one wife wouldn't have wanted to have 12 kids, but I was kind of like, wow, this is so cool though, how the chapter you read about recognizing the Yitzhahara and the different sections in here, like talking about the angels and sin and talking about how Jacob was a bridge and how his example was what helped them to do teshuvah. Yes. I was just sitting here going, wow, these two chapters, two different books keep speaking to each other. I'm like, God is so in control. This is wild.
I was telling Leah this week, I really appreciate Ahmed. He's really been giving us a lot of accolades lately and pushing for our class. And so we appreciate that. Ahmed, if you're listening, Shomer Ahmed.
Definitely appreciate it. It's very encouraging.
And this coming Shabbat, we start humility with the kids. So we'll see how that goes.
How did it go last week? Did it go good?
It went good. We did an introduction. I gave them journals and gave them a long lecture and everything about don't lose your journal, don't lose your journal, don't lose your journal. So I think it's going to go well.
Oh, so nice. I can't wait to hear how it goes with those little guys.
Hey, Joyce kind of lost touch here, but she wants me to relay a message that she is really enjoying this.
Oh, good.
Oh, so glad,
really helping her out in her everyday life.
Oh, good.
Oh, Baruch Hashem.
Yeah, so thank you both, Batya and Leah. Awesome.
All right. Well, I'm going to stop the recording.